First, a disclaimer. The views expressed in this video are my thoughts and my thoughts alone. If you are interested in the book that we're talking about, please pick it up and read it and review it for yourself. Reviews are important to new authors as they tell us so much and they help us out more than words can really express. Also, if you're interested in following my own work, you can find links down in the description. Now let's proceed to the review. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are reviewing Lighlark. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have basically been through this book twice, or almost twice. So I listened to a live reading of it the first go around, and I missed quite a bit, or thought that I missed quite a bit, due to having to listen to it at work and while doing other things. So I picked up the audiobook because I have a ridiculously high number of credits through Audible because I like to do audiobooks. They let me do things whilst I'm reading, and most of the time I can keep track of the story. This time was an exception, so I picked up the audiobook, and let's just say it wasn't the work that was the issue. But we'll start off with the timeline, and then we'll get into what I liked, what I didn't like, and my thoughts. So Lighlark is a city that's surrounded by a forever storm, and it clears up every 100 years for what's called the Centennial, where for 100 days all the rulers of 6 different realms come together to try to break a curse that was put on them long ago. The Centennial lasts for 100 days. There are rules to it which we'll go over later, but that's not something we need to cover right now. The 6 realms, as far as I can remember, are, and we're just going to call them all the Lings from this point forward, Sunling, Skyling, Moonling, Starling, Wildling, and for like the M&M and the bowl of Skittles, Nightshade. Yes, the emos of the group. No, it's just a phase, Dad. Yeah. Our main character is Isla Crown, who from this point forward I will be referring to as Knife Girl. Knife Girl is a wildling, and odd among all the rulers, she has no powers. Oh, thank goodness we don't get a full description of her being a power-mad dictator. Knife Girl she's got a lot of issues that we will go into later. After a massive info dump, we arrive at Lighlark, where we meet the king, who is the possessor of 4 different powers from 4 different of the realms. And we are given our room and a servant who is scared of Isla, and for good reason. Since Isla is the ruler of the Wildlings, she is subjected to the Wildling curse, which means that at least once a month she has to eat a human heart. Isla has a lot of trouble understanding why the child's afraid. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, why are you scared of me? All I do is eat other people, but that's a whole other thing. Sorry, if it sounds like I'm being a bit stuttering in this, it's because the book itself is kind of stuttering. Anyway, we convene again for a dinner among all the rulers where Isla is presented a heart because it is known that the wildlings eat exclusively hearts. And while she digs in and disgusts everybody else, it is decided that, yeah, we'll honor her request to let her eat in private. We meet some of the rulers and we go through a blood-binding ritual, which shows the various powers of all the different people reflected in their blood, where it's burned by a candle, and for some reason the candle flame turns crimson, because that's the color that it turns when it burns blood, which is not the color of burning blood. Anyway, now we get into the rules of Lighlark. Or the rules of the Centennial. So the Centennial lasts for 100 days, but there's no killing until after day 50, and pairs will be decided by day 25. They will be decided by the winners of the trials, which I guess are kind of a way to describe what their powers are. It's rather ambiguous. Also, they cannot kill their partner once their partner is decided. Now, at the beginning of the book, or somewhere near the beginning of the book, Isla was talking about running away with her best friend Celeste before the killing started, but the way the rules are set up, it sounds like they won't be able to, and after the blood-binding ritual, I'm not sure how they're going to follow through on their plans. The trials themselves, the first one's supposed to be a duel. It's not very well choreographed. And the second one, for lack of a better term, is a talent show. And if this doesn't sound like a very good recap, well, you're right, but the story itself is kind of murky. So let's get into the things that I liked. Well, that was a long, exhaustive list. Okay, let's get into the things I didn't like. And first of the list is going to be Isla, or Knife Girl, as I'm going to affectionately call her. Why do I call her Knife Girl? Well, because she has knives for days. She has a knife belt. I think she had a knife choker. She has knife rings. Just knives and knives and knives everywhere. Every time she needs a knife, she pulls a different article of clothing, which just happens to be a knife. I might be over-exaggerating, because I've joked a bit about this with some other people, and honestly, this book is so murky and confusing it's hard to tell. But back to Knife Girl. Knife Girl is from the Wildlings, and they're supposed to be a group of warrior, temptress, seductress people, blah blah blah. However, Isla is a virgin, but she also dresses like a thought. Every other time she's going to a dinner or a challenge or something, it's describing some new thoughty outfit that she's wearing. It's just kind of insufferable the amount of time they spend focusing on what she's wearing and how it clings to her frame, and oh, it would be modest, but it's see-through and blah blah blah. It's just tedious and boring at this point. Actually, let's cover a little bit more about her past. So, it's stated several times in the book of how they were real strict with her and how she was cloistered and kept from everybody else so she could do all this warrior training and learn knives and learn to endure pain. But Knife Girl also has this thing called the Star Stick, which allows her to travel extensively. And she talks about her extensive travels around the world where she met her best friend Celeste, and I'm going to be honest here, these are two completely different pasts. You cannot simultaneously be cloistered and sheltered and extensively traveled the world, looking at things and meeting new and interesting people. You can't have these two backstories together, especially for someone who's as young as Knife Girl is. And I believe she's 18 or 20. Some details escaped me because this book was just awful and boring. Another thing, she's supposedly a good enough combatant to stand toe-to-toe with the king and Grimm, who is the Nightshade ruler. And yes, I'm physically shuddering at the awful choice of names here. But all of this is just a little bit of dressing, and I mean ranch dressing, to the tacky chocolate cake that is Knife Girl, because she complains about how other people don't like her and how other people might want to kill her, and she doesn't understand why people would betray her, but she's honestly just an unpleasant and unlikable person. She's constantly rude. She's basically treating most everyone with disrespect, especially the king, who she's supposed to be seducing or getting to fall in love with her, and apparently she's taking the Sundari treatment, but more sun than dairy. So, because she's just kind of abusive with how she talks to him. Almost all the time. Snide remarks, treats him badly, threatening to gut him. I mean, this is not how you attempt to woo somebody, especially from a race of people who are supposed to be known temptresses. I think they would have left off the lessons about how to win your first date. Threaten to cut out their guts. Yes, that's the way to do it, Knife Girl. So let's talk about the Wildlings for a moment, the people that Knife Girl is supposed to be ruling. First of all, they're supposed to eat exclusively hearts. And I keep mentioning exclusively hearts because Knife Girl doesn't seem to be sticking to this. She often eats several other things, including chocolate. In fact, she has a whole little diatribe about how she could eat her weight in chocolate. I'm sure the whole eating exclusively hearts thing was done for poetic license. But the thing is, if you're going to say they have to dine exclusively on hearts, they have to dine exclusively on hearts, especially if you say human hearts. And for that matter, if you're going to have them dine exclusively on human hearts, they should probably have a good understanding of why nobody else likes them. You know, they're supposed to be these seductresses who bring people in, and if they fall in love with you, they'll murder you, and then they'll eat your heart. And even if they don't fall in love with you, they still might kill you and eat your heart. Gee, I can't fathom why people don't like the Wildlings too much. It's not going to be hard to figure out which realm they decide to get rid of, because supposedly in the prophecy, a ruler's supposed to die and the realm's supposed to be destroyed. And I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that, from what I understand, they probably do much better without the Wildlings around, the tribe of Amazonian heart-eaters. But fortunately for the rest of the world, the Wildlings seem to be a dying people. Can't imagine why. And the whole kill people they fall in love with, blah blah blah. It's described that's what happened to Isla's parents. It's described what happened to Knife Girl's parents. Because apparently they fell in love, had a child, and shortly after the child was born, the father killed the mother. Wondering why he waited so long, he could have made a twofer and spared us this book. And it's also mentioned that because of this, there are more women than men among the Wildlings. I would go more into the other races, but I honestly can't be bothered, and I didn't care. Let's get into the next thing I didn't like. The pacing and integrity of the story. The pacing of the story is basically non-existent. There's not much more I can say to that. The whole thing is murky and confusing. At one point, we're in the middle of the trials, then we're doing something else. Things just kind of phase around with no real transition whatsoever. There's a lot more telling than showing in this book, and what it's telling isn't terribly fun. As far as the integrity of the story goes, half this book, I have no idea what was going on. As I said before, things are just kind of happening. Knife Girl just responds to every threat with threats, violence, and often cajoling if she can. She doesn't seem to be terribly smart, and she seems to be threatening a lot of violence, though she's not terribly violent, but she's quick to threaten it. There's also the problem that people just kind of enter and leave without any notification in the book. You'll be having a conversation with one character, and then the next we're in a fight, and then we're having a conversation with another character. As I've said, the whole thing is very murky and confusing. There's this whole love interest thing with Grimm, and the forced proximity love interest thing with King, and it's terribly boring. It feels monstrously forced. Honestly, the only interesting person in this whole story was the king, who has to struggle with keeping Lightlark afloat. It's based on his power, but he's also dying, and he's forced to be in proximity with this little monster who keeps threatening to cut him up when he's literally done nothing but help her. Well, at least until the point when she reveals her secret that she has no powers, and then suddenly it's a curse your sudden yet inevitable betrayal. Knife Girl talks about how much she dislikes the king, how much she hates the king, and yet she tells him her greatest secret, and then is shocked and surprised when she's done nothing but abuse this man when he tells it to everybody else. I'm getting into some spoiler territory, but honestly, I don't care. And again, I want to mention that for the bulk of this book, you'll probably have no idea what's going on. Things are just happening. And I know that most books are just things happening, but the art of writing is combining these things that are happening in an entertaining and informative way that people can follow. This book doesn't do that. There's other characters as well. Most of them are of very little consequence. They come and go without warning. You'll know who they are because their names are pretty simple, and that's one thing I guess I can compliment the book for. The names are fairly simple and easy to remember, but you don't get any points for it when you've wrote this trash fire. Anyway, the other characters are pretty boring. Most of them are stereotypical or at worst completely forgettable. The king is supposed to be this gruff but evil man. Really, he's just reserved and defensive, because if you fall in love with somebody, they get all your powers. He has a monstrous amount of powers. The man's being responsible and trying to keep things level, trying to make sure things are fixed, and people wonder why he's reserved. He's also dying, but that's a whole other thing. That's a spoiler or whatever. Then there's Grimm the Nightshade. He's some gothy love interest warrior, blah blah blah. I'm getting some real Twilight vibes here. Boy, I'm going to get some comments on that one. Grimm, you're never quite sure if he wants to kill Knife Girl or if he just wants to bone her silly. And honestly, after the third or fourth run-in, I just didn't care. It comes across as very middle school, or at least what a middle schooler would think some kind of will they, won't they dangerous romance would be. Also, there's Celeste, Knife Girl's best friend, who, I'm going to be honest, I forgot about her for most of the book until the very end, when she pulls, and here's the big spoiler, the most predictable betrayal ever. So Celeste and Knife Girl are looking for the bond breaker. And the Bondbreaker is supposed to be able to break their curses, and Celeste is a starling, and they die at 25, and they're trying to stop her from dying, and then after that I kind of forgot about her. When she's mentioned, it's kind of just glossed over or didn't care. But then at the end, it turns out that she was the original one who did the curse, and she's not actually affected by it and lives forever, and the Bondbreaker is actually the Bond Maker and allows her to steal everybody's powers. It's trite, stupid, pulled out of their ass. I don't care. I didn't like it. Let's get into my thoughts. This book needed two major things. The first being a developmental editor. They really needed somebody who has experience writing books go over this book and point out the parts they needed to cut. Or just develop better so people would have had more enjoyment out of this book. The second is more research. I get this is supposed to be fantasy, but there are certain things you really need to nail down in order to pull people into their world. Things like the heart eating of the Wildlings. And I'm going to continue to harp on this because one human heart does not contain enough calories to sustain a person for a month. 2, if you live exclusively on the hearts of your own species, you're going to be an immensely unpopular people because most people don't want to die. And I can't emphasize that enough. Most people do not want to die, so it should be no surprise that this group of people would be considered pariahs. Furthermore, there are too many inconsistencies in this book. I thought the trials at first were supposed to be some kind of death tournament, but then they weren't, and then there was the talent show thing that went on, and just stuff happening. Didn't care. Was glad the book ended. Next, and this is a major niggle for me, some of the word choices in this book were absolutely terrible. And this is a hill I'm going to die on. The past tense of sneak is snuck, not sneaked. And there's a reason for it, because snuck is easier to put into conversation than sneaked. And the reason for that is there's too many hard sounds in the latter too close together. There's a reason for the word snuck. It has a much nicer flow. But some of the descriptors used in this book are just terrible. I get it, it's someone's first book, but as I've said before, this really needed a developmental editor. And I understand this book had a monstrous campaign to get it out there, promotion. She could have afforded a developmental editor. Someone close to her should have told her to take this to a developmental editor. Many first-time authors can't afford that luxury, and it would benefit them immensely to have one. This author could have afforded it, and really should have afforded it. There could have been something good in this. I know other people who have somewhat enjoyed this story, but I'm not one of them. Also, this book needed to show more. This thing is just info dumps galore. There could have been a slow introduction to the different rulers of the different realms. The trials would have been a good time to actually demonstrate their powers and how they're different and their curses. The power scaling also needs to be worked on. Some people are so freaking powerful, but yet it's never used to any positive effect. One of them controls the wind and plays a mountain like a musical instrument. The other one can teleport anywhere at any time, taking anyone with them. These are stupidly overpowered powers. And we're still being introduced to stuff near the end of the book. That's a petty gripe because there are some books that can get away with that. This ain't one of them. In a book that's well structured, continuing to introduce new elements can make the story interesting and want you to continue reading it. In a book that's basically an unorganized trash heap, it's ranch dressing on a chocolate cake. It's unnecessary and just makes what's already there more terrible. And I know some people like chocolate cake, but unfortunately I can't eat it. I will say in closing, this is not the worst book I've ever read or listened to. That award still goes to Handbook for Mortals. But this was close. And with that being said, I will wish you all good luck. Thank you for listening to my review. If you have any books that you would like to hear my take on, please leave them in the description. I do tend to favor indie authors over conventionally published, but I will read whatever I find interesting or whatever captures my fancy. If you would like to read, review, or criticize my own works, I will include a link in the description. Also, please keep the comments civil in the comments section. Also, if you enjoy what I do, please consider giving this video a like, sharing my work, or subscribing to my channel. Thank you.